Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Path Forward at Trees, Water, and People. Just waiting for a couple more folks to log in, and then we'll get started. All right, just a note to say that the call will be recorded. We want to make sure that folks that couldn't make it today get to see it. And we'd love to see your faces if you're so inclined. You're welcome to turn your camera on and give us a wave and a hello. These calls are for building community. Thank you for coming. And we want to hold these every 6 months just to give you an update as TWP supporters of what we've been up to, what we're seeing and experiencing in the field. And also hearing from our partners and communities about what's going on in the places that we work. So we hope that you find value in it. The real purpose is for an interaction and exchange. So we'll give you a brief overview and update of Trees, Water, and People's work, and then open it up for question and answers for the last 30 minutes. So if you have a question during the call, make sure to type it into the chat. Hope Radford will be managing the call and compiling the questions for the Q&A session. And yeah, let's get started. So, oh, hello, nice to see everyone's faces out there. I'm Sebastian Africano. I'm the Executive Director of Trees, Water, and People. You'll be hearing from Daniela Bueso, Director of the Mesoamerica Program, and James Calabasa, Director of the Indigenous Lands Program. Got a bunch of TWP staff here present and also downstairs watching with us. We're really glad that you've joined us today. And really, we want to thank you first for being supporters of TWP. These are trying times. I'm sure everyone can relate that it's been an eventful year. And we really appreciate donors that help us provide stability for our staff and our team. The hardships of this work keep increasing, and so the more stable we can keep our team, our staff, our employees, the better job that we can do in delivering our programs and commitments to our communities. And make sure that your microphone is muted, please, for the call. Thank you very much. Just so everyone can hear the presentation. So, we ask a lot of our staff, and at times like these, add extra strain and burden for people that are working to improve the lives of the most vulnerable. So make sure that you hug a nonprofit employee today and thank them for their service. There's people all over the country working under difficult circumstances, and yeah, it mounts up. We had a TWP staff retreat recently at the end of the last month, at the end of August in Dolores, Colorado, where we do work with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe, and got to just be with each other, commiserate, check in on each other, reaffirm our humanity, and assess the impacts that we've had, visit some of the work, meet some of our partners, and just gather as a team, which we don't get an opportunity to do all that often. And it was very re-energizing. It's very important for us to take a step back and reflect on the work, reflect on the organization's values. One of our values is focus on the horizon. So look beyond all the short-term stuff that's going on and disturbances that are going on in our day-to-day that keep our heads spinning, and really focus on the long term and make decisions based on the long term, because we know that that's what matters. It's setting a pace that's sustainable and continuing to move forward. And you could really feel the impact of the gathering. We had a closing circle where we shared affirmations and commitments to one another. And after our last staff member spoke, we just stood there in silence, taking in the moment, reflecting on, the importance of our work and showing reverence for one another, right? We all respect each other tremendously. We have 18 staff now working throughout Central America, New Mexico, and here in Colorado. And it's really great to come together in community and see that we're all moving in the same direction. So it's really good to let that sink in. Because, make no mistake, these are trying times, these are difficult times for the work that we do and the people that we serve. We read an article this week by Global Witness that said that out of 150 defenders of natural resources, land, and environments that were murdered last year, 120 or 80% were in Latin America, and a third were indigenous, right? And so that really brings importance to the work that we're doing with groups like COEAS in Honduras, where we lost an environmental defender in 2023. And we're working with the community to permanently protect the land that he was trying to protect himself for the past 37 years. We got it ratified as a national wildlife refuge, but now the real work begins, you know, of protecting it, formalizing it, and making sure that it stays under community control and governance for perpetuity. And the same in Santa Fe National Forest, where we're working with tribes to protect and also restore the Santa Fe National Forest and also the forests on tribal lands after devastating forest fires that have been hitting the Southwest all too often, right? We had kind of a respite this year. It had pretty good rains, but we're also seeing a lot of flash flooding in places like Ruidoso, New Mexico, where we held our Stewards of the Southwest Forestry Summit, Fire and Forestry Summit earlier this year. They've had a really tough time recovering from their fires and keep getting knocked down by torrential rains. When there's no forest to hold all that moisture, it comes running downstream and causes devastation. So, you know, the work that we're doing is more important than ever. And we're seeing hostility and headwinds, right? Our own, not to bring politics into it, but one of our greatest donors, the Ford Foundation, that's sponsoring a lot of our work in Central America and Mexico and the Caribbean, as a matter of fact, was called out directly by our vice president for its giving choices, right, that are unfavorable to the current administration. And this is one of the most trust-based and community-oriented donors that we've had the opportunity to work with, and one of the most consequential because of their reach and the size of their operation. But we were heartened to see that foundations, over 150 now, signed a letter in response to the vice president's comments saying that we reject attempts to exploit political violence to mischaracterize our good work and restrict our fundamental freedoms, like freedom of speech or freedom to give, right? And it's really great to have that kind of support, because, you know, it really takes a little bit out of you when you feel like your work is under attack and there's hostility towards the thing that you hold dear and what we work towards every day. So it's great to see the philanthropic sector coming together, and donors also standing up and not being afraid to continue supporting those organizations that are doing important work, working on, you know, the consequential challenges of our time, like climate change, stifling of voices, and also maybe the stifling of indigenous communities and their rights to their lands and to their resources. And so, you know, again, that puts us back in the spotlight, and we can either choose to, you know, be more quiet and say, okay, we're going to wait to see what happens, or we can say, no, we know, we believe in our struggle, we believe in the struggle of these communities that we're supporting, and to slow down now would be to lose momentum and to lose ground. And so we've chosen the latter, and that's why we have these calls. And we also host calls, and we're trying to do these every 6 months, and we hold other calls also for foundation partners directly that are funding our work through grants, and we try to bring them together to receive their reporting in more detail all together every 6 months as well. And so if you're a foundation partner, thank you. And please join those calls as well every 6 months. It's part of our practice of trust-based philanthropy, and making sure that we can move forward as a team, as peers, because, you know, we really have to join forces and work efficiently to create change in the world. So, you know, just a note on our work with Ford Foundation that I'm sure Daniela will cover, but it's really been groundbreaking. We're working all over the region, and we're doing research on grassroots economic development in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean, looking for those examples of local economic vitality that are less impacted by the macro economy and the global economy and the geopolitics, right? Those sustainable examples of economic development and economic sustainability that are really holding communities up and people up in local contexts, in spite of everything going on at the global level. And so we're cataloging these, we're mapping them, and this report that we put together will inform Ford Foundation's grant-making practices, hopefully, for grassroots economic development for years to come, right? And we want to be a part of that as well. So we're currently talking to funders about what the next phases of that work looks like and how we can support some of these examples, and so that they are strong and buttressed and feel like they're supported from the outside, but really leading from within in their communities and regions. So while this is different for TWP, it really highlights our role as a trusted regional partner and convener, right? It really has elevated our voice and allows us to bring groups together across broad geographies. That's also how we do it with the Stewards of the Southwest Summit in New Mexico, where we bring over 200 forest and fire managers from tribes all over the Southwest together to talk about issues affecting tribes and their natural resources and strategies to combat it, and bring together funding to ensure that there's employment in natural resource management, restoration, fire mitigation and prevention, and watershed restoration, which benefits all of the Southwest, right? And benefits people in downstream from any of these watersheds. And so it's really important work, and we want to make sure that our tribal partners are front and center and involved in the conversation that affect their territories, but also the territories around them, because they're critical actors, right? This is Indigenous sovereignty in action. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Daniela Bueso to give an update on the Mesoamerica program. We've been doing a lot of great work in Central America, and like I said, expanding into Mexico and the Caribbean as well. So Danny, take it away.
Thank you, Seb. And hi, everyone. I'm so excited to see so many familiar faces on this call, and thank you all for joining us today. So I wanted to start off by giving you all kind of a big picture introduction and a brief summary of our Mesoamerica program, as well as going over some of those challenges and ways that we're responding as a team. So as you all know, to start, the closures and operations and the abrupt reduction by the USAID funding in the region has had a huge impact on civil society, particularly the local medium-sized organizations that heavily relied on these technical and financial support for the most vulnerable communities. And when you add all of these mass deportations that are going on, sadly, all the countries where we work, like Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, are among the most impoverished, violent, and climate vulnerable countries in Latin America, right? So many migrants who are returning to these countries are returning to very scarce opportunities for employment, leading to a high demand of local groups and services that are already stretched thin, and organizations that supported these migrants coming back with the significant funding reduction and closures are leaving the region with a largely unprepared support for their arrival. So sadly, our partners are starting to see this amount of pressure already on these vulnerable communities. And one of our partners in Guatemala, are seeing similar impacts with deportations dividing families, but also threatening the economic stability for many of these communities that we work in. But we also know that this amount of challenges can also be a time to rebuild. And if we keep investing in these opportunities to help local communities stay rooted. So against all of these amazing odds, partners have responded in very unique ways, right? They are adapting their programs to these new challenges. They're also diversifying their streams of funding, and they're investing in their staff and communities as well. And, this USAID removal has left vulnerable organizations that are depending on outside funding. So one of our main strategies as a program has really been to strengthen the local organizations from the ground up, to work towards their long-term resilience and independence and autonomy. So that has been one of our biggest strategies as a program. And I also wanted to personally thank many of you who are on this call, the biggest supporters and allies that have helped us with your funding, with your support, fill these gaps that our program is going through, and really supporting our partners in the communities that we work with. So to give you some key examples of these approaches and strategies that we're working on is, like Sebastian mentioned, the Ford Foundation study. We got this amazing opportunity to do and analysis on economic alternatives that really has allowed us to expand our networks in the region. We've hired new consultants, and this is really to start to influence a broader condition, such as public policy, financing that will hopefully support sustainable economies in the region for the long term, right? So this has been a very successful program, and it's been led by Hope Radford, that I want to give her huge credit for the amazing work that she's doing. As well, too, the Climate Land Use Alliance. This has been one of our, most important programs for the past year and a half, almost 2 years. With this funding, we've been able to actually train and give institutional capacity training and strengthening to our partners. So we already worked in Guatemala with 2 of our partners, Mexico, and now we're entering in the second phase, working with our local partners in Honduras. So this is basically helping them create, a community diagnosis, making them have their strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years, and really giving them kind of the seed funding to create and diversify and innovate some of their programs. So CLUA has been an incredible supporter and filling in those gaps as a main strategy as well. Thanks to all of these kind of fillers and all the donors that are here with us today, I want to share 2 successful stories that have recently come up from our program. One of them was one of our partners in Guatemala, thanks to all of this support, has actually been able to apply and get approved for a multi-year grant with the World Bank. And this is going to support them for the next 4 to 5 years for working with 4 different organizations in Guatemala. That's a huge opportunity. And they called us and said, thank you for supporting us, because it really propelled us to pitch something this big. And now they got approved, and it's showing that they're diversifying and adapting to these changes. As well as in El Salvador, earlier this year, the Salvadorian government sadly imposed a donation tax reduction for any international donation coming into the country. And because our partners were so prepared and ready to go, they actually applied for an exemption, and they got the exemption, and now we're able to continue supporting them and the hard work for the civil society in El Salvador. So again, those are kind of the big picture fillers, strategies, some of the challenges that we've been going through as a program. And now I want to give you all a brief summary of how our programs are doing. So we luckily have, the general support to continue on until the end of this year, hopefully next year. We recently opened a program in El Salvador on the Pacific side. So we migrated from the Apaneca-Ilamatepec Biosphere Reserve, which is in the north side of the country. And we partnered with 2 local organizations working on mangrove reforestation, clean fishing, and supporting women with food sovereignty initiatives. And we're actually calling this program the Blended Livelihoods Program. So for the first time in history, we're supporting inland communities and coastal communities down in El Salvador. So we're very excited about that new partnership. In Mexico, we continue our efforts with supporting local organizations, indigenous organizations in the outskirts of Oaxaca, in protecting and management their communal forest, as well as working with indigenous women to provide them with workshops and entrepreneurial skills so they can have diverse economic alternatives and provide for their families. And then in Guatemala, our 2 amazing partners, UTSCHE and Fundebase, continue working with indigenous communities on food sovereignty, forest protection, women's empowerment, and indigenous sovereignty as well. And then finally, in Honduras, like Seb mentioned, this newest refuge in the outskirts of Tegucigalpa, our partner down there, COEAS, just entered the phase of the Climate Land Use Alliance process. So they're going through their strategic plan. They're prepping themselves for the next 3 to 5 years to become co-managers of this park or this refuge. So CLUA really comes in at the perfect time to help them prepare for this. And then our cook stove program with ADESA continues to, help families around the country with their clean cook stove program, paying stove builders, investing in local economy, providing health for families, and reducing deforestation. So just wanted to give you all kind of a snapshot of what we're going through right now. I would be more than happy to answer any questions at the end of the call. And thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart and my team for your support. And now I would like to introduce James Calabaza. He is the Indigenous Lands Program Director. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, thanks Daniela, and thanks Seb for grounding our conversation to high level updates for the organization. Hello everyone, great to see many of you familiar faces and names. Thank you so much for joining our second webinar on terms of how do we build resilient communities and ecosystems together. As mentioned, my name is James Calabasa. I'm a proud citizen of Santo Domingo Pueblo down in north central New Mexico. And similar to what Daniela spoke about in terms of challenges, successes, it's been very, very similar for our Indigenous Lands program, which works in Colorado, New Mexico, South Dakota, and then hopefully soon in Northern Arizona as well. So 2025 has been a roller coaster year, as most of you all know, with, things coming out of Washington, events taking place locally and regionally, but also, new opportunities. I always get asked the question, it's like, y'all are based in Fort Collins, but don't do much work in Colorado. Something we've been trying to navigate a lot over the last, since I've been with the organization. So proud to say that we made some really strong advancements with Colorado-based initiatives, new partnerships, many of you that I see on this call, to really strengthen our roots in within this beautiful state that we call home. But generally, like our Indigenous Lands program has seen a lot of great momentum and success within these last, 10 months or 9 months? We're still in September, right? Yeah, 9 months. Excuse me. I just got back from New York late last night, so my head's still trying to catch up on so many things. But yeah, these 9 months have been really interesting to be part of this roller coaster ride from hosting our summit back in March. We were close to, calling it and saying we're not going to host it, but our indigenous and tribal community partners in New Mexico and the Southwest were really like, we want this, we need this. Sometimes things are about community. Our work is about cultural preservation and not the politics of things. So we moved forward with it. We took a big risk in signing or sending like $80,000 worth to pay for a summit that we weren't unsure if the feds were going to pay us back. But it's part of that commitment that we know that it's important to, support our initiatives and stay aligned with our overall mission and vision. Since then, we've made some great progress in conversations with more communities in New Mexico. That includes our foundation partners and funding partners about what are the next steps? What do we want to accomplish, by the end of 2030 and beyond? I've now been absorbing this phrase that's been used a lot by our friends at Native Americans in Philanthropy as think generations and not administrations. I think that really is grounding our work to like consider that it's going to take time. We're not going to get results in a 1 year, 2 year time frame, which is why we're big advocates for trust-based philanthropy, and especially while investing in Native American communities. Regarding that, it just takes time. Relationships take time to heal. We all have to recognize the traumatic history that our country has had towards these individuals and communities, and that's a role we've been playing over the last few months, is helping mitigate and make sure folks understand if you're an investor, a funder, an ally, that we all have a role to play in how we heal our communities and move forward together. But programmatically, we've, few challenges that we've encountered are, really environmental based. We have our own agenda, we have our own timelines and goals, but so does Mother Nature. It's being in New Mexico, living there for the summer months. We saw that it was a rough year. It was a drought year. The Rio dried up. First time I've ever seen the Rio Grande River dry in the city of Albuquerque. And that gave me a moment to really reflect on like the importance of the work we need to do moving forward. But the drying up of the river is just, was just a PR of like the importance of investing into natural resource management. I saw it directly, and many of my colleagues saw it directly about the importance of shortage of water, farming, recreational. Our communities are struggling with, having to, continue their cultural lifeways and sustenance to ensure that their families are being fed, their economies remain strong and vibrant. So Mother Nature's own timeline and work really created some obstacles for us to, get by. We were supposed to plant 15,000 trees back in late July and early August. Historically, that's the monsoons in New Mexico. didn't happen this year, but we're scheduled to get those 15,000 trees planted on burn scars within the Santa Fe National Forest that Sebastian, mentioned earlier here next week. So we are pushing timelines back. It does require us to, talk with funders that, hey, what we gave you when we proposed was not going to work. But if you allow us some flexibility and understanding that Mother Nature has its own course, we're going to work things around. So really appreciate and thankful for everyone's flexibility, understanding that we as humans, we tend to think we can control stuff, but Mother Nature has, its own course. And glad to see Julie, your comment there that there's been some great rain and some moisture coming into the Southwest, which has allowed us to move forward with our projects that schedule these next coming weeks. Another challenge has been, funding at the federal government level. We were awarded $1.3 million last year, well, at the end of 2024, to do work within New Mexico, both in Santa Fe National Forest. We're slowly but surely starting to unlock that funding. It's our first time, as an organization working with the federal funder, especially domestic-based projects. So just like most of you all know, it's not an easy process, a very bureaucratic process, especially now they're really keeping an eye on things more closely. So just recognizing that internally we're building out our operations to learn how to start the reimbursement process and, work with our federal partners. But they also got held up with all of the stuff happening with Doge and audits. And so that pushed our timeline back in regards to project implementation and planning. But we remain resilient and, committed. I think our commitment to the work has even gone stronger because of these obstacles. It's something we've really learned and taken in from our tribal partners is that, informally, to quote them, they don't really care who's in Washington because they've been screwed over for 400 years. So they're still waiting for that day of like, where is the real change going to happen? Like they've lived through many administrations where they've been promised, or if they've been, those promises are broken. So it just made us think that like, yeah, it's really important to invest in the relationships versus, the 4-year time frames that these administration agenda items come forth. And that's really a success story to where our program is at right now. We just launched our Save the Date flyer for our 2026 Stewards of the Southwest Summit. That's going to take place at Santa Ana Star Casino. For those who are in New Mexico or nearby states, we welcome you all to join. So there's so much merit to be in the room with experts with, that are not, technical experts in Western science, but land management and connectivity to the landscape and cultural resilience. That the dates are March 3rd, 4th, and 5th. We welcome everyone to join. It's always fun to be part of community, learn from the community, and then just look at how we balance out life together in regards to our professional and personal workspaces. So that's been, something we've grown since our first year. This is our 3rd annual. We've seen it go from like 150 to now 300 plus people attending our conference. So love to see many of you, open invitation. Another success story we've had really has been our place-based work here in Colorado. We've strengthened our partnership with the Montezuma Land Conservancy as well as the Ute Mountain Ute tribal community down in Mancos, Colorado. We just wrapped up an amazing project in the Mancos River where we installed 52 low-tech process-based restoration structures that our team was able to visit as part of the staff retreat for TWP. And in, seeing the importance of that type of work, relating it back to cultural preservation is paramount. But then again, Mother Nature has its own course. We are scheduled to do some monitoring and evaluation this fall, but due to, really no flow or low flow, we can't really test the effectiveness of these structures and the project until we get at least, a minimum of 50 CFS flow in the Mancos River. So pushing our timelines out We're extending our contracts with, experts who are going to be doing the monitoring with us. That way we can get valid data, valid research that can showcase to the science world, the research world, but also to our indigenous communities and partners that this work is important. We need to continue to invest more into that type of work. But wrapping up that project as a community was great. A lot of smiles, a lot of optimism for the future. All done around a community barbecue that brought the landowners, our project partners, Native American youth from the Hopi Reservation to come and celebrate, because that's something we recognize is that we talk a lot about the importance of the work, but we never really embrace the success. We don't embrace each other's commitment and dedication to the work. So being able to do that just, I think, was a great way to wrap up the physical part of the work. But yeah, all in all, our Indigenous Lands program is going strong. Our staff are just as dedicated. We've been making some great connections across the region with our foundation partners, individual donors. And yeah, I think it's just we're just looking forward to wrapping up this year with doing boots on the ground work. We're going to be mobilizing more funding out the door to invest into Native American youth through workforce development opportunities, but also academic endeavors, at various universities. But we can't do it without y'all's support and y'all's, commitment to our work. And so thank you all so much for your continued support, and also be happy to answer any questions, thoughts, comments regarding interest for our Indigenous Lands program. But with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sebastian, who's going to, guide us into our next section of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, James and Danny. Really proud to work with such high caliber folks like you all, and everyone else from TWP on this call. If you haven't gotten it yet, you should be getting soon our fall newsletter. This is the English and Spanish version. We're producing them in Spanish. So if you're at the Central America Donors Forum in a couple of weeks, look for Danny and grab one of these in Spanish. You can get on our mailing list on our website or by making a gift to TWP. Really great content, stories, and this is where we keep our donor community updated, as well as online via our Tree Free Press monthly email and our regular blogs. And James mentioned something really important. I mentioned that one of our values as an organization is focus on the horizon, right? Think in generations, not in administrations. But another one is inspire reciprocity, right? Really trust to us as a verb, and we extend and convey and value trust among our partners, our staff, and our donors, because it helps our work go around, and it helps take some of the burden, some of the friction out of the work, and really help us focus on relationships, because we know that people are what move this work forward, both at the community level here at our office, and also in relationship with those who fund the work. And so we really try to inspire reciprocity every day through our storytelling and through sharing openly and being transparent with folks like you all. So thank you for that. And with that, I'd love to open it to questions. Hope has a list that she's collected from people that submitted before the webinar. And also, I'd love to invite people to raise their hands through the chat feature and ask any question you'd like. We'd be happy to chat with y'all. Hope, who's first?
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks, Seb. Thanks, Danny, James. Please feel free to keep typing your questions in the chat. We have till the end of the call just for your questions. That's what we're here for. But I will start with some that we got ahead of time. I'll start with two questions from Diane that I think we've touched on, but I imagine a lot of people have these same questions. So one is decreased federal funding affecting TWP's core operations, and what, if any, programs are being put on hold as a result of funding cuts? So I'll direct that to you, Sebastian. James, Danny, if you have anything to add in, feel free.
Yeah, thanks, Diane. Appreciate you. Yes, we had some, as James mentioned, some hangups with federal funding, direct grants that we were awarded that have been really hard to dislodge from the administration and actually turn into funding. So they're reimbursable grants, so we have to spend money before we can submit for reimbursement. But when the reimbursements are stuck in bureaucratic gridlock, we're just making expenditures and moving the project forward and waiting for that to come loose. But the other effect, I'd say, is you know, the funding space has become a lot more crowded. Organizations that were very dependent on federal funds are suddenly knocking on the doors of the same foundations that we work with. You know, there's been a lot of mergers and a lot of layoffs. There's a lot of unemployment in our sector and the places that we work, especially in Latin America. Entire organizations just disappeared, closed their offices, you know, left their leases behind, left employees hanging, and because they were completely dependent on federal funds. But those that, you know, did survive and are making an effort to stay active are now, you know, looking to the same foundations that we work with for new funding. And so we're doing a very intentional job of knocking on the doors of these foundations, telling them about the work that we're doing at the macro level, and convening and working regionally, and making sure that TWP is considered in those conversations, because it's become a more crowded and noisy space as the dust settles, the proverbial dust settles, and we figure out which way or what's next in the funding world and how things consolidate. And at the same time, you know, federally related is kind of all of the hostility towards foundations, private foundations, that have the freedom to give to and support their missions and support the communities that they serve through their missions. But, you know, there's real concern and targeting. So a lot of resources and focus are going into legal defense against those threats and that hostility, which I think just changes the dynamic, both in the federal funding and also in private philanthropy. So, you know, we encourage people to keep moving forward. A lot of this is bluster. A lot of it's going to end up in the courts, and we can't stop or be frozen in our tracks when, you know, the needs are increasing, right? And climate change doesn't wait for anybody. Mother Nature is on its own schedule, like James said. So, James, Danny, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll add something that, you know, we've actually found as part of, you know, the federal government slowdown on grants and funding, is that for those individuals who did survive and, you know, are within the agencies, I think there's been a lot more transparency and kind of trust being built within these agencies. For example, in Santa Fe, you know, we've been fighting this obstacle of like, how can we start unlocking our federal dollars to, you know, get some funding to help with, you know, project planning and contractual costs, and, you know, specifically for our tribal partners. The line officer of the district we're working on, you know, has been really honest and open, you know, with us regarding that things are just changing within the feds, and it's hard, and they're learning too. Like, these are new policies that they're being told that they need to follow it by and abide with. But, you know, the transparency piece is now becoming a big component to our work, that they are now they're willing to stick their neck out to work with us, you know, and that's something, you know, that usually comes in with some concern of like, how much will a person have to like stick their neck out to like support these initiatives. But yeah, we're seeing a whole different kind of place-based level of individuals honoring more of that transparent approach to the work. And that's been helping us learn the process as well. You know, we are, you know, the funding that we got awarded last year from the feds to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's America the Beautiful, you know, a heavy chunk of that is, you know, budgeted for our staff time, for our Indigenous Lands Program, our key partners in New Mexico. And, you know, it's been challenging to be able to, you know, wait until that funding can be released. But we've made some great progress. We're hopeful by next month we'll be able to get some of that dollars come in indoors so we can pay out to our tribal partners, because most of you may know they're really dependent on federal funding and don't have much flexibility in terms of participating in projects that do not, you know, necessarily associate to their tribal lands and such. So yeah, I think just the transparency and trust has really been developing within our federal partners.
Yeah, and
Great. Thank you both.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead, Dan.
No, yeah, I was just going to mention, you know, as a Mesoamerica program, we don't really rely on federal funding now. But as I mentioned earlier, some of our partners who did depend on this USA funding have, you know, have this removal. People have been fired. So the sector people in Latin America are looking for jobs, filling in those gaps. And so partners reach out to us and say, hey, can you keep helping? Can you increase your funding? Can we diversify our programs? So it's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of competition. Everything is saturated. And I think at this time, we just have to focus on sustaining them as much as we can, supporting them in any way that we can with unrestricted funding, long-term funding, 3 to 5 years, keeping them strong as organizations so they can apply to other types of funds besides USAID. So that's just from the MAP program.
Great, thanks, Danny. Julie, we will get to your question next. First, I want to do one more question that we got from Diane ahead of time. This will be for you, James. Are you still planning to move forward with the watershed restoration project on Jemez?
Yes, and thanks, Diane, for the questions. Yes, 100%. We've made some, again, great progress there working with folks in the Jemez district, in terms of the next steps. And our partners are equally excited as well because we're going to use this project as a regional training hub to, train folks around like low-tech process-based restoration techniques. We want to continue more funder visits. I know, Diane, you're able to join our colleagues Michael and Tristan out in the field that day. I think that's something we've also learned. I'll share over these last few months is that we're now taking more opportunity to, plan and schedule site visits, project area visits, community visits, with our funders and friends. I think there's nothing more powerful than being directly in the field or in these communities and to see things from your own eyes. And so we had a great, I think, first round of hosting these site visits in Mencos, Colorado, and then in the Santa Fe National Forest this summer that we want to continue with it moving forward. And so yes, we are planning. We just got our first draft of a design project report completed for the feds for them to review. Feedback has been great. We got a few things we need to work on. And so I think once we polish and fine tune those things they want us to do, we should be able to get like implementation going by early as next year. So really great progress, great trajectory moving forward. And yeah, just a lot of excitement overall from partners and communities to be engaged in this.
And thanks for Diane to joining the field trip out to the work site, to the project site. We took a number of funders and supporters out to see the site of Capulin Canyon and the area where we want to reforest and restore watersheds that have experienced major forest fires, because it's a massive area, and seeing it gives you an idea of the scale and the time and dedication that it's going to take to make an impact. So thanks for coming out and seeing it first person, Diane. And to Julie's question, are you able to name some of the foundations that have been threatened by the current administration? Too many to name. In the speech that I was referring to is Open Society Foundation and Ford Foundation, but I've put a link in the chat to the open letter in response to that hostility, where over 150 private foundations and philanthropies have signed, defending their rights to free speech and their right to give freely to the causes that they consider important for society, right, and the planet. So it's really heartening to see so many signatories to this letter saying, we will not be moved and we will continue forward with the work and support the organizations. But the general gist or aim of the administration is to threaten their 501c3 status, their nonprofit status, tax their endowments, get their hands in those pots of money. And that has dangerous consequences. So while we would like to see a higher rate of giving and deployment of those funds by philanthropy and private foundations, this is not the way to go about it. And we're working to encourage foundations through trust-based philanthropy to deploy more of their funds onto the field, because these are the times where those funds need to be in action, right? But yeah, check out that link that I attached to the chat. I see you saw it, Julie, and the names of all the foundations that are up in arms and really attuned to these hostilities are on there.
Great, thanks, Seb. Please feel free to keep sending questions over the chat. We have plenty of time, so that's what we're here for. We'll go to a couple that we got ahead of time as well, both related to water quality and the work that we do related to that. James, I know you already shared some about our work in southwestern Colorado, but maybe to add to that a little bit. One question from Jane. We're interested in both educational and advocacy initiatives about water quality. And one question from Danny, how can we convene in small groups to bolster our local watersheds? So Danny, Seb, James, any of you who want to respond, probably James first, about our work related to water and watersheds.
Yeah, happy to do that. So our work in Southwest Colorado is heavily focused in the middle section of the Mancos River. And, right now the project is on 3 parcels of different private lands. And the focus there is really is kind of enhancing the riparian ecosystem, because of future vulnerability to a changing climate. And that, and then includes other focuses around water quality, wildlife habitat, underground hydrology, functionality. But in terms of, this project too, we are really hopeful that this can influence policy at a local and a state level to really ensure that more resources, expertise, and funding can be allocated to initiatives similar to the project we're doing. For example, like the state of Colorado has been really pushing forward on agenda items on how do we improve the functionality and the system of the Colorado River Basin. And the Mancos River is within the basin. It's because it eventually flows into the San Juan, and the San Juan flows into Colorado River. So we as in partners and an organization feel like we will provide some really valuable data and lessons learned and experience from our project to local institutions that have, the power and opportunity to influence policy, again, at the state level, especially as Future Trajectory is showcasing more drought conditions in the region, and that the Colorado River will begin to really become more different in a watershed functionality. So a lot of technical expertise is required in that. And so we're fortunate to work with a great partner in Mountain Studies Institute, who have a team in doing all of the M&E, monitoring and evaluation, and just field-based assessments to look at how are we improving water quality as well. We're really taking this approach and acting like beavers. Like, you all probably have heard the stories of beavers being the hydrology experts in these systems. They know how to improve water quality by slowing it down. So that's really the focus here, is that when the water flows more slowly, it improves overall conditions, it stays cooler. And that's the main point we're trying to create here, but also long-term abundance. We've got some pushback from ranchers, from farmers in the region. Not gonna, lie there, that not everyone agrees with this concept of we call it restoration-based work, because they feel like we're taking their water from them, especially those that have, high-level water rights in a region that's already an arid ecosystem. But what we're trying to showcase to them and inform them about is that not only will you have higher quality water for your crops and for your needs, but more water over a long period of time. And that's really the main emphasis we're focusing on here. And then hopefully that will influence policy level opportunities to kind of modify or amend current policies to increase, not just our work, but just a collaborative work across the basin and region.
Yeah, to add to what James was saying, in Mesoamerica, we're seeing Mexico, for example, last year went through a massive drought. So our partner, Red Mocaf, had the same issues that James was mentioning. They postponed tree planting, survival rates went down. So again, this is all to protect the local watersheds, right? So the important part here of our partners is that they think holistically, and then the protection of each of their forests is to not only provide trees, provide protection for biodiversity, but it comes down to protecting the watersheds that sustain the communities downstream, right? And so when we maintain fire brigades, when we employ park rangers, when we employ these local indigenous communities to protect these forests, they're really trying their best to protect their watersheds. And so to us, Mexico is one example. Coeas in Suyapa in Honduras, they're the ones that fight, these massive fires to prevent erosion, to prevent these watersheds from disappearing, to maintain that biodiversity that sustains, their healthy ecosystem. And as well as Guatemala, these are indigenous communities that protect ancestral forests, and some of them have gained, right, the land tenure back. And so they are even more proud to protect these forests and these watersheds. So small amounts, small communities, small staff, and people protecting the forest, but I think it goes a long way, and it's all interconnected for the Mesoamerica program.
Just want to
Perfect.
show
Thank you both.
John's hand up, and then I see questions from Rita. John, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sebastian. James, I got a question for you following up on our conversation last week. So James and I were both at the Colorado Forest Collaborative Summit. And we spent some time thinking about engaging with indigenous communities. And one thing I noted about the event is we had probably about 100 attendees, and James and Philip were the only two indigenous folks there. Exactly, Sebastian, exactly. And then we also heard from Matt McCombs, the Colorado State Forester, and Allison Lurch, who's with DNR, about what they're doing to promote forest health and wildfire mitigation work in Colorado. And James, I couldn't help leaving both of those conversations, feeling like, there's a ways to go still. And so I'm wondering if you have any other, like, having experienced that event and the presentation from James and Allison, what are 2 or 3 things that those of us from non-Indigenous organizations can do, or the state can do, to broaden the engagement and partnership, with Indigenous communities, not only in Southwest Colorado, but where these communities exist throughout Colorado?
And I'll just say Rita's question is really close to maybe dovetail your response, James, because we're getting close on time. Could you please expand on the roles of Indigenous tribal members and leaders in decision-making in our programs?
Yeah, no, happy to do that. Thanks, John, for the question, and Rita for the question. So I'll start off by saying that, so TWP is a non-Indigenous led organization. We have probably 25% roughly of our staff who come from tribal communities. But what we do in terms of our framework of working with these communities is heavily integrate them into those decision-making conversations. So like our partnership with Santa Fe National Forest, yes, it's our name on the agreement, but we can, I really don't like using the word consult because I think it's been abused a lot by the federal government. But we have those conversations with our tribal communities to ensure that like these type of opportunities that we can take on as a nonprofit NGO will support their and prioritize their agenda items. So it takes time, building relationships is the #1 factor and foundation to all of this, but then strategizing, requires critical thinking, co-creation, co-development, and these opportunities and ideas. Because at the end of the day, we really don't want, the work to be ours. We don't want ownership of these projects. Yes, it might have our, TWP sticker or a name associated with it, but really projects should belong back to these communities. They're the ones who are, dependent on the communities. So when it comes to how to best engage, or like how can you improve on engagement or collaboration with tribes, I think the one thing we learned a lot is, directly investing into them, providing funding for them to participate in professional networking, conversations. And that's where trust-based philanthropy comes in. And really thankful to a lot of, the funders who are on this call who have recognized that having flexible funding to then, allow for travel costs or travel expenses to come to, where conversations need to take place. That's been really well received from, our tribal partners. And then the second one is recognizing that, we're all on Indigenous land somehow. We're all, part of a story that can be rewritten to allow for a more equitable approach towards land conservation or land stewardship. In Colorado, it's really great to see that the state is increased, how they can work better with the 30-some plus tribes that have historical ties here. And then I'm hoping that the state will then follow through with more funding and resources to allow for those tribes that are listed to come and like do co-stewardship work together, relational building, advocacy and for policy and other initiatives. And that's been really great to see that, the state is, pushing that agenda item forward. And then I would also just think that, so those two have been really great. And then the last one is just to be probably challenge each other a little bit more to like, stop thinking about like come to me, but I'll come to you kind of concept. Yes, like the two tribes in the state of Colorado are 7 hours away from Durango, and trust me, we know like it was a long drive. We were just down there. But that's part of the commitment, I think, that we as you all, sorry, because I'm also Indigenous, you all as non-Indigenous folks will have to take on is like, how can we flip that script of like asking folks to come to us or come to our events? How can we come to you all that's going to be best fitted for your agenda? Again, granted, it's a little tough in Colorado. New Mexico is different because you can drive 15 minutes and you're already in a tribal community, or you're already somewhere close to, there's a lot of these conversations shaping up. It is challenging. It's not an easy kind of one size fits all approach, especially here in Colorado. I think that's why we found much more success in New Mexico, because 3 of us from the Indigenous Lands Program are from these communities. Treston, who is from the Navajo Nation, I'm from Santo Domingo, and then Michael Martinez from Oke-Owingeh. So we're able to kind of utilize our local networks to create professional networks and connections. And then, being close to Santa Fe, or being grounded in Santa Fe now helps us, really scale up our opportunities. So I hope that works, John, or it kind of helps clarify things. And I think just investing in personnel that can support your organizations by looking at, getting positions created more local to these communities are important. And that's where Trees, Water, and People has found success, even in our Mesoamerica program, having colleagues being stationed down there.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, and that's why I threw my hands up. It's not uncommon that often our teams and our team members are some of the only Indigenous representation in some of these forestry meetings and agency meetings. And that's why we started the Stewards of the Southwest Summit. It's a summit and a gathering for Native people by Native people, talking about issues that affect Native people, right? But also that affect and benefit society as a whole, right? But there's no great places for those conversations to happen, and so we created one ourselves. And to Rita's second question, yes, we're continuing to work in South Dakota on some riparian restoration and tree planting, and starting relationships with the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming for bison rehoming and restoring the plains and biodiversity on the plains. Well, we have about 2 minutes left, maybe a minute and a half. So I'll just close by saying thank you all so much for extending your trust to Trees, Water, and People, for being on this journey with us, for continuing to stay engaged and to keep your head up in these trying times. You can always count on us to keep moving forward and to focus on those positive stories. There's more good than bad in the world these days, and we try to keep the focus on what we can do to lever change. So by being part of this call, you're part of that movement, and we thank you and encourage you to reach out if you have any other burning questions that didn't get answered, or if you just want to engage with us on a different level. Give us a call anytime. We want to hear from you. So thank you all, and the path forward continues. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day, great week. Stay strong.